Quantic Dream is one of those well-known developers that I don't think has actually released anything particularly good during their time as a company. Heavy Rain is about as quality as it gets when we're talking about David Cage and his development team, and even that was a poorly written, nonsensical mess. So when Detroit Become Human was announced, I looked at it like this. Either we get another mess of a game that I can enjoy because of how bad it is, or we get an actually decent game for a change. God knows Quantic Dream are due. So after playing it, how does Detroit Become Human stand up against its predecessors? Surprisingly well, as it turns out. Detroit Become Human is set in Detroit in the near future, in a world where human-like androids are commonly used in the home and workforce as expendable servants, and it's here that the game allows us to control 3 androids in their own interconnected narratives. The first of these is Connor, an android tasked with investigating rogue or deviant android incidents around the city, and his goal is to find and end the cause of these deviancies. Kara, a housekeeper android, becomes deviant after enduring abuse at the hands of her owner, and her storyline revolves around securing freedom for her and the family she gathers along the way. The final plot thread follows Marcus, a caretaker android who, through a series of traumatic events, becomes the leader of a group of deviant androids and must now choose how to best secure peace and basic rights for his newly freed people. Taken as a whole, the narrative of Detroit Become Human is entertaining, but ultimately shallow. It feels like David Cage is trying to make a statement about issues like race relations and domestic abuse, but ultimately it comes off as heavy-handed and clumsy. It leans heavily on cliches and you'd be hard-pressed to find any subtlety in the game, but if you ignore some of the more on-the-nose dialogue and don't dwell on the cartoonishly awful humans the game presents you with in an effort to make you sympathize with the androids, then it still makes for a fairly engaging story. What's more, the game features some genuinely likable, if archetypal characters, and exciting moments, and there aren't many glaring plot holes that keep the story from making sense, unlike Cage's previous work. While I couldn't call the writing top-notch, part of what makes the story mostly enjoyable is the quality of the cast. Clancy Brown and Brian Deckert contribute stellar performances as the surly police lieutenant Hank Anderson and the no-nonsense android investigator Connor, and while the other 2 plot threads feature solid performances of their own, it's the work of Brown and Deckert that stand out the most. To be honest, whenever I was playing Marcus or Kara's stories, I was finding it hard to not count the minutes until the next Connor section. Though most of the performances are all really entertaining, it's hard to deny that there's a little bit of a balance issue here. Thankfully, this is about the only thing that puts any one storyline above another. In terms of visuals, the entire game looks pretty fantastic. I found myself noticing plenty of neat touches throughout my multiple playthroughs, including the effect of rain falling on characters' faces, which was put on display about as often as humanly possible. There are a few hiccups here and there, mostly with regards to textures popping in late and the frame rate taking a serious hit on the rare occasion. But on the whole, Detroit Become Human is a visual treat. The game's audio is similarly solid, with decent voice work being just one of the most noticeable aspects of the game. I found that previous Quantic Dream games fall back on hiring extras and occasionally main characters from their home country of France, and while that's cool and all, it always makes immersing myself into one of their worlds an absolute nightmare, especially when you consider that the majority of their games are set in the States. This time, I think I picked maybe one French accent in the entire game, and that was from one of the sections Quantic Dream released earliest, so I'm inclined to give them a small pass. Beyond the voice work, the game features a soundtrack that is distinct, depending on whether you're playing as Connor, Kara, or Marcus, and the decision to have 3 different composers work on one story each is interesting and makes for a neat audio shift whenever you swap characters. Detroit Become Human was always going to look and sound excellent, there's no arguments there. Regardless of what I've said about Quantic Dream in their prior work, I'll admit that I know them best for their graphical achievements and commitment to making their games as cinematic as possible. But they usually fall apart in terms of their actual writing and their execution in gameplay. While the writing, as stated before, is a marked improvement, Detroit's gameplay just doesn't fare as well. The quick-time event-heavy mechanics of Quantic Dream's past games makes a return for Detroit, and they don't seem any more clear, functional, or fun than those found in Heavy Rain or Beyond Two Souls. While the gameplay is relatively simple and difficult to fail without trying, certain actions are far more frustrating to perform than they should be. Motion controls using the 6-axis are never completely responsive, and their inclusion often had me confused between them and the right stick motions during more frantic sequences. On top of all that, whoever decided that the stick used for camera control should also be used to initiate interactable elements of the environment should be given a stern talking to. I lost count of the number of times I'd go to interact with something only to find that moving the camera had caused me to do something else instead, or just negate the interaction altogether. It's very frustrating. The gameplay of Detroit isn't without some charm, it's just that the base mechanics aren't overly engaging. Where Detroit Become Human does make some improvements is its handling of player choice. Games like Beyond or Heavy Rain wanted to make you feel like you had the ability to choose where the story went, but you rarely had much of an impact at all. Detroit goes so far as to feature full flowcharts after each sequence to show you just how many options were on offer at any given moment in the game, as well as hinting at elements across multiple different gameplay sequences that could potentially unlock paths further down the line. Upon replaying a second time, I found my outcome was drastically different, and probably would have been more so if I'd been willing to fail more sequences than I did. I think the best part of the entire game is knowing that even something as small as a dialogue choice could change how characters view each other, and in turn can affect events later down the line, a mechanic not unlike the relationship mechanics found in Until Dawn. It adds a layer of unpredictability to the plot, as well as simply making the characters feel more natural due to their changing attitudes. In addition to making your choices feel important, I think Detroit does a great job of keeping players engaged by constantly shifting between the three narratives, and the overall spacing given to the more exciting gameplay sequences makes Detroit far less of a grind than previous Quantic Dream games. While you still have to do the odd menial task because reasons, you're never given too much downtime to get bored, making Detroit's 12-hour runtime seem just about right. As long as you're enjoying the story as much as I was, it doesn't have enough time to wear out its welcome, though by the time the credits rolled, I was satisfied by what I'd played. Your mileage may vary, but I think Detroit Become Human does well to avoid wasting your time over such a long duration. At the end of the day, while it may not be saying much, I will happily declare that Detroit is the best Quantic Dream game, hands down. With that said, Detroit Become Human is good. Maybe I'm cutting the game a lot of slack thanks to the games that came before it, but I honestly think that the game is solid. Is it perfect? No, not by any means. It's clumsy, ham-fisted, and lacks any form of subtlety, and its gameplay is basic and often janky, but I did find it entertaining with some excellent performances and exciting moments thrown in for good measure. And for the first time, I felt like my actions mattered in a Quantic Dream game. That's about all I ever really wanted. If you liked any previous QD games, you owe it to yourself to check this out. If you're a fan of, say, Until Dawn, then Detroit might also appeal to you, even if it's not quite as good.